Hi there, Claire Kennedy here, and welcome back. Today we're going to have a wee look at some of my favourite paints and tools. Truth is, you don't actually need loads of stuff. I know that when we first start out, it's all very exciting. We go to the art shop, it's a bit like an Aladdin's cave, and we just want to buy it all. But I actually think that sometimes having too much stuff can actually get in the way of our art making. I mean, I've accumulated my fair share of stuff over the years, as you can see from the shelves behind me. But if I actually take a step back and think about it, I probably only use, a few favourite paints and tools on a regular, almost daily basis. I mean, I add other things here and there, but these are my core supplies that I look upon as my sort of my toolkit. And I think having a simplified, pared down toolkit in a box or on a shelf is a really good way to go, especially when you're starting out, when space is usually quite limited. You might be working on a corner of the kitchen table. It just means you can get your things out, get started. You're not making loads of mess, and then when you're finished, you just pack it away. And that way you're more likely to paint more often, and therefore you're going to get better quicker. So it's win-win, really. Everybody's toolkit is going to look a bit different. I'm just going to show you what works for me, and maybe you'll get a few ideas from that. So let's go and have a look. So, paint. Let's start with some paint. These are the paints that I use a lot. Now, I have to say, not all paints are equal. There are some supplies that you can cut corners with. Actually, I always use very cheap paint brushes. I find them absolutely fine. But with paint, I'm afraid there really is quite a difference between the cheaper and more expensive brands. And that just comes down to pigment. Brands like Golden and Liquitex are really great quality. They are more expensive, but they've got a really high sort of pigment load. Whereas the cheaper brands, the pigment load is much less. There's more sort of fillers in there, and they're just maybe a little less vibrant, but they're fine. And the good news is that since they're both acrylic paints, they are mixable. You can mix them together. So you might want to have a few cheaper ones, maybe one or two more expensive ones, and that way that you can experiment that way. I tend to use the cheaper brands for underpaintings. So when I first start a painting, I don't really like working straight onto a white background. The first thing I normally do is cover the whole thing in black or sometimes metallic colour. So I'm not going to use any of my expensive brands for that. But I have to say my favourite brand is this one, Golden. They're great quality, really heavily pigmented. I mean, they are quite expensive, but there are ways of actually extending the colours, which we can look at in another video. And they have a great range of colours as well. I never really normally have more than 7 or 8 out at a time, sometimes less. They change, but this is what I've been working with recently. Some are always there, like Payne's Grey and Transparent Red Iron Oxide. I always have bottles of them on the go. I really love them. Payne's Grey is more like a sort of inky sort of blue, really, like this. And it's really lovely. You can make some beautiful darks with that. And if we look at the Transparent Red Iron Oxide, well, we looked at that in previous videos. It's a really beautiful transparent colour. If I can get some out. It's a really beautiful transparent colour, and I use this all the time. You can make beautiful glazes out of this one. So they are always there. The others kind of change here and there, but as long as you've got something that's kind of reddish, something that's bluish, and something that's yellowish, you're always going to be able to make, well, an infinite array of colours, really. You might notice I've not really got a black here. I've got this cheaper black, which I use as my underpainting, but I don't tend to bother really with a black here. I feel that I can get a dark enough dark using my a mixture of the Payne's grey and my burnt sienna, which I also often have in. You get a really lovely dark with that. I find that works fine for me. In your work, especially if you work in a very sort of graphic way, if you want that real sort of black, that really only comes from a bottle. I'll show you here. It is different. That is pretty dark. This is proper black from the bottle, so I don't feel the need really for that. But I do use a lot of white, so I always buy that in a bigger bottle because I use a lot of white in all my work. The other thing I quite like to have is 2 different blues. At the moment I've got an ultramarine blue going. That's a sort of reddish blue on the redder side of the colour wheel. And at the same time, giving this a quick wipe, at the same time I quite like this cerulean blue, which is a slightly more, a blue which is on the sort of greener side of the colour wheel. So that just really widens the range of colours that you can achieve. Now you'll notice that these colours that I like, they're coming in bottles rather than tubes. You might be more familiar with acrylic paint coming in tubes. That's because they are fluid acrylics, and they're just runnier than the tube paint. A bit like sort of, you can see that coming out. It runs, I suppose it's got a consistency a little bit like single cream, something like that. It's just really, but it's not watered down in any way. It's still very heavily pigmented. It's just really personal preference. I like working with these. They're flatter. You can build up thinner layers. You can still make lots of texture, but more sort of optical texture, if you know what I mean, rather than actual physical texture, which I find quite interesting. Also, I like to add a photographic layer at some point in the process. And I like quite a nice flat surface for that. So it's just really a personal choice. You might prefer to, use a palette knife and, thick paint and build up texture that way. And for that, you would use paint from a tube, which is also known as heavy body paint. So this is actually the same colour as this. This is Payne's grey in the fluids. This is Payne's grey coming out the tube. It really acts very, very differently. I have to say, I've actually been introducing more thick paint from a tube into my work recently. I think it gives quite a nice contrast actually when you put it beside the thinner, more textured areas. But I've not gone out and bought a whole new array of tube paints. I've actually only got 2 or 3, and the one I mainly use is white, because I find they mix perfectly well with the fluids. So if you want, maybe you want a kind of palish blue. I've got my Payne's grey here. You can just mix it up. Actually, I'm going to put a little bit more out. It mixes perfectly fine, so you can actually make any colour you want, really. And you don't have to buy a whole new set of colours. Put a little bit more in here. A palette knife, by the way, is great for mixing, rather than always using your brush. It doesn't load the brush up. You waste half of it, really, when you wipe the brush afterwards. And it doesn't ruin your brush by getting into the sort of metallic bit at the top. And I would apply this using my new favourite tool, which is this It's called a catalyst wedge. It's sort of silicone. It actually feels quite nice to hold, very ergonomic. It's got a bit of weight to it. You could also use, I don't know what they're called actually, but these things that you scrape the paint mix out of the bowl, sorry, not paint, cake mix out of the bowl from, a baking supply shop, these silicone things. It just gives a really nice sort of smooth, buttery swipe. It kind of takes your hand out of it, if you know what I mean. If you imagine that beside a really nice glazed texture area, it's a really nice contrast. So that's a sort of a new tool in my repertoire, but I'm really enjoying it at the moment. And that's what it's about really, is using these paints and tools to find contrasts like this, whether it's opaque paint and transparent paint, which we looked at in the first video, textured areas beside smooth areas, loose areas beside more precise areas. That's why masking tape is also in my toolkit. A really nice straight line beside a more textured area is just really, I don't know if it's going to work here actually, because I'll just have a look. It's just really satisfying, and it's also very satisfying on peeling it as well. So I'm quite enjoying using masking tape in my work a lot at the moment as well, but especially if you imagine a really textured area or a very sort of transparent area beside it, it gives a nice contrast. Other tools which I like are these scrapey tools. I've already gone into that in more detail in the second video, scratching and scraping. I also like these Caran d'Ache Neocolor sort of crayons, and they're good because you don't have to buy a whole set of them. You can buy them individually, so you just have to get the ones that the paint, they go quite nicely on top of some of the paint as well. You can only need to buy the ones that you like. So anyway, this is my basic toolkit, and all of my recent work has been made using this. And in a couple of weeks, this might look a bit different. It tends to sort of shift and change organically, but this is what it looks like at the moment. So next time, we're going to look at how we can simplify things even further by using a limited palette of only maybe 2 or 3 colours. And you'll be amazed at how many colours you'll be able to mix. But hope to see you then. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Bye for now.